It is Thursday, the 25th of January, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So, the Britt Hermes... That was a thing.
It's still a very
thing.
Quick thing.
Well, this is the thing, is that we were going to talk this show about the fundraiser that the Australian Skeptics have started because Britt Hermes is being sued by the American naturopath Colleen Hoover over some blog articles that Britt wrote for her blog Naturopathic Diaries, where she highlights the claims made by naturopaths and some of the things that they're taught to treat.
Yeah, and Britt, for listeners who might not be aware, is a former naturopath.
Yeah,
who towards the end of her training, she kind of set up as a junior in a practice and realised I'm not remotely qualified to treat anyone. Actually, this is all nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. And Britt obviously is a former QD speaker, which kind of makes her a forgotten superhero of science, apparently.
Yes, that's true.
And so Britt is now spending her time writing about what she actually learned in naturopathic practice and how dangerous it can be, as well as doing a PhD in Kiel in Germany, where she now lives. And as a result of the writing she's been doing, she's been taken to court by Colleen Hoover. And obviously we've seen plenty of cases in the past of libel cases where the costs spiral, and if you don't have exceptionally deep pockets, you could be forced to back down your case, not because you believe you're going to lose it, not because you believe you were wrong, not because of any other reason, then you don't have the pockets that are deep enough to be able to cover it. And when it comes to being able to defend scientific speech, it's not really it's not a good situation that you're silenced by your financial means rather than the evidence and factual basis of your claims. Because we don't believe that people should be, or specifically the Australian skeptics, when they came up with this idea of a fundraiser, wanted to send the message that you can't silence the criticisms of skeptics purely by relying on the salutary effect of financial burden in a legal case. Because of that message is a useful one to send. The Aussie Skeptics started a fundraiser to say we're going to help fund Britt's legal defence, so she actually, if it does get to court, she's able to then put her case forward and have it decided on merit. So we were going to talk about how important it is to get this fundraiser up and running and how we need to all sort of band together. But they've actually already passed the amount that Britt really wants before we've had a chance to get it to air, which is a fantastic thing for the skeptical community. Now, it does mean that it's worth saying just because they've passed the amount that they're looking to get doesn't mean we should stop there, because legal costs can spiral. The nature of Britt's work might well mean that there is another case around the corner at some point in the future. And also, if not Britt, then there are other skeptics out there who we do see being threatened with liable cases and silenced through financial means in that way.
Britt is in a fortunate position in many ways, in that she's managed to establish herself as being reasonably prominent within the skeptical community. By the time, if she was just some anonymous blogger, she almost certainly would have just said, well, I'm just going to have to take the post down, because she wouldn't have had the contacts within the community to be able to say, hey, I need help with this. And
I know that's the case because with working with good thinking, people come to good thinking with exactly that story. When people have been threatened by, there was a case actually relatively recently where there was a chap who was exposing the claims of an Indian guru who was using sleight of hand to pretend to be doing all sorts of spiritual techniques, and he was being threatened to be sued for various different things for using clips of the guru in the videos he was making that exposed those claims, and he was actually quite worried about being sued, and luckily he came to good thinking, and we were able to get him in touch with the right kind of legal advice to go forward. But if you're an anonymous blogger and you don't have that kind of level of international prominence or international support or goodwill, or even an awareness that this community exists, then you can end up in hot water pretty quickly. That causes you to retract what you might feel to be perfectly valid and defendable claims just because you can't afford to defend them.
Can't afford the suit. Hopefully, what's happening with Britt is the first step in being able to do something to address that issue. So if you are an anonymous blogger defending science and reason, then you're not going to be scared off by spurious lawsuits that are designed entirely to silence you.
Yeah.
And very little else.
And it's worth pointing out the fundraiser that's actually raising money for Britt, which is still open and is still looking to sort of raise more, as we were saying, for various causes afterwards. None of the money goes to Britt. The only way that the money is taken out of the account that it's in is when her lawyers present an invoice to the account holder, basically. So it goes directly to the lawyers. Everything that's more than is used in the defence of the case will be kept for 12 months, just in case the case is reopened or if there's something that comes as a result of it. And then at the end, all of it will either go to a long-term legal libel defence fund for skeptics or to charity. So it's not that Britt's making money out of this. It's not that the Aussie skeptics are making money out of this. This is something that's being done for the skeptical community.
So if you want to donate to that, listeners, the URL to go to is skeptics.com.au/Britt Hermes. And on there you'll find a donate link, which is just a straight-up PayPal link.
We played, we had a games night around ours the other night.
We did have a games night around yours the other night. It was fun.
To play till something like 3 a.m. or something.
It was a good evening. Me, you, Nicola, Andy Wilson, a few of our mates.
Laurie, Karen, Katie, Adge, Emma.
Sat around playing games.
It was
good. It was a fun evening.
I didn't go to the board game evening because I was in Cornwall for the funeral of my grandfather, who died fairly recently, which was nice. It was actually a really nice couple of days that we spent in Cornwall.
We've talked about him on the show before, haven't we?
We have mentioned him on the show before because in April last year I went down to visit him and I told one of my favourite stories of my granddad chasing him round a little village in Cornwall as he was trying to find directions to the little church because he wanted to take us to this very exciting place, which was a beautiful part of Cornwall called Hellsmouth, which is where we've now gradually taken the whole family. Everybody's been to see Hellsmouth because it's my granddad's favourite place, and it is beautiful. But we'd decided to get there following the directions of a man with quite serious dementia, which wasn't the smartest thing to do.
A circuitous route.
Yes.
We
got there in the end. He got us there in the end, despite leaping out of the car to run around and ask random tourists in a village in Cornwall if they could get us to the little church. Eventually an older couple figured out where he meant.
Had the faintest idea what he's talking about.
Got us there, and then he got us from there to Hellsmouth, which was good. But no, it was a nice couple of days in Cornwall. It was a very arduous journey because I had to get the train down to Derbyshire to my parents and then drive 5 hours, 6 hours from Derbyshire down to, it's basically as close to Land's End as you can get. It's as far away from anywhere as possible. I don't know why he chose to live there.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because you get down as far as Bristol and think, well, I'm pretty much on the south coast now. But no, you've got as far to go again.
It's like a 6-hour drive from Bristol.
Down the peninsula. It's horrendous.
It's a 5-hour drive in total, but 6 hours from Bristol, and Bristol's more than halfway there. It's just everything elongates as you get down towards there. It's like an event horizon. Truro is an event horizon, and you spaghettify into Cornwall.
He actually passed away when I was in Bournemouth, just before, I didn't find out until afterwards, but just before I started my talk in Bournemouth. And so I got back to the accommodation I was in after giving the talk and thought, well, maybe I can, Bournemouth isn't so far away from Hale. Maybe I can get from Bournemouth. I can go and be with my mum while she'd been in hospital with him for 10 days, and maybe it's not too far. It would have took me longer to get from Bournemouth to Hale than it took me to get from Liverpool to Bournemouth. It would have taken 5 hours 50.
That's a disgrace. Why is England such a stupid shape?
It's bizarre. I'd have had to come back. Part of it's the trains. I've had to come back up to Reading to go back down again to that part of the world. But yeah, it's middle of nowhere. So we went down there for the funeral, and it was lovely. We had a service with no religion in it whatsoever, because one of the more interesting things about my granddad is he was an atheist for most of his life, despite having been born in the 30s when religion was much more, everybody was religious. He was an atheist for most of his life. Turns out, a bit of a skeptic. Didn't believe in the idea of belief. He only believed in things that he could prove that he could that were based in fact.
He wasn't a flat earther, was he?
He only believed in things he could see with his senses.
He didn't believe in the nature of belief. I don't believe, I just know. No.
He was the kind of man who would have told you that he was a flat earther and you would have had no idea if he was telling the truth or not. He liked to say controversial things just to start a discussion, to start a debate.
He was a troll.
He was a bit of a troll. So sometimes he'd say things that were a bit controversial and you'd have to really watch him carefully to look for him with his little twinkle in his eye that he was definitely just pulling your leg. It was nice. And throughout the service, they played a lot of the music that he'd written. So he was, from his 50s onwards, he decided to give up his job. He'd always been working in government when he lived in the UK, and then he'd moved to France and he'd been working doing odd jobs and as a labourer and he built so many houses. And then in his 50s, he decided he was going to become a full-time musician. So he was composing and arranging music, and he was a conductor, and he was involved in a lot of, he was like lead chorister for quite a lot of different choirs and taught people to sing and taught people to play music and things. So I've got a massive book full of his music that he decided, I'm going to die soon. I'm going to type up all my music. I'm going to print it all out. I'm going to record versions of it and give it to people. So I've got like a load of his music that he's written.
It's a really brilliant little book as well. I think it's fantastic.
It's great. It's got like children's songs, choir music and pop music. He loved pop music. He liked Westlife. I remember having a conversation with him over the dining room table that he thought Westlife were brilliant. He thought that they wrote really great music and they thought they were really, really good. So he's got like, at the end he's got a load of pop music that's written in English that's all written, the lyrics were written by him as well as all of the music. Some of it's quite like complicated stuff. I can only read very basic music. And then he's got these beautiful choir pieces and some really nice music that was played. The musical versions were played during the service, which some of those were really lovely. And then there's some children's songs at the beginning that are all written in French that his friend wrote the lyrics for, which I don't understand a word of because I don't speak any French, but they look nice. I can work out what some of them are called. So there's one that's called What Colour? And obviously in French, and one that's called
magazine
Rainbow. There's one that's clearly about him that's called, it's written in French, but it's Freddie Dreams. He was called Fred. And having got Marsh to just translate some of the lyrics it was talking about, Freddie had a dream to build a boat, which my granddad Freddie did have a dream to build a boat, and he did build a boat.
And he built a boat,
in his shed. He decided, I'm going to build a boat. So he built a boat. He built a little boat first just to make sure that it would work.
Right.
And then he built a big boat in his shed, in his like barn house that he had in this house in France.
Could he get it out of the shed?
I don't know that he ever finished it. He never really finished projects. He decided that he wanted to move on to the next thing. He's like, what's the point in making something nice when I can start the next thing? So he built a house, but he wouldn't finish it. He sold a house. He sold a house in the UK where he'd screwed, plug socket plates.
Yes.
It didn't have enough electricity points in the house. So instead of redoing the electricity in the house, it was a house of one of his, he was a bit of a womanizer, one of his wives, mum's house.
Sequentially, not.
Sequentially. He had multiple wives at different times.
Seriously, parallel.
So they'd renovated this house to sell it on, and instead of redoing all the electric, he just bought some plastic plug socket covers.
Right.
And screwed them onto the walls so that he could sell it to say, look, it's got lots of electricity points.
Definitely a troll.
It's like, it's fine, it'll sell the house, and then they'll realise that they're not real electricity points. So, he was a bit... He didn't really finish any projects, so I don't think he finished the boat. He did build a swimming pool, and he built his own solar power heating for it. He built quite a few houses. It's
not bad building a swimming pool, because it's hard not to finish a swimming pool once you've got a hole. It's only how much nicer you make the hole.
Which, for my granddad, would have been, it's a hole, it's got water in it, it's fine. Doesn't matter if it's grubby around the edges. But he did build solar heating for it. What else did he build? He figured out a way to roof a house on his own by designing a load of pulleys so that he didn't have to have somebody to help him build the roof.
I see.
Okay, right.
And apparently he had this thing about picturesque views. So he built windows that would obscure anything in the view that wasn't picturesque. You could only see from any point in the window, you could only see the most picturesque view.
Okay.
And then we found he had this dream of building his perfect dream house that he'd done designs of, and we've got some designs at home that my mum's hoping she can find somebody to do like some 3D imaging of it. So if you've got any listeners who can turn like designs into a 3D model that we can see, that would be really cool. It's a circular house that has outdoor spaces all the way round, so that you can start in one area in the morning, and as the sun moves, you can move all the way around the house.
Yeah.
So in the morning you have your coffee here, and in the afternoon you have your lunch here, and go all the way around the house. So that was his little dream project that he never got to do, because it would have been really complicated to build a circular house.
Yeah.
But that was his dream. So he was a bit of an eccentric man. We received a story a little while ago from a friend of the show, Chris Hofstadter, who told us about a friend of his who was a listener to our show. I'm not going to share the story with our listeners because it's quite a private story that I don't have permission to share, but I do want to send our best as a show to Mia. Thank you for being our listener. We're told your favourite stories are the cancer stories, so it seems quite fitting that today I have one of those to discuss.
Hooray.
So, you may have seen in the news a fair bit recently about a blood test for diagnosing cancer. The Guardian said blood tests could use DNA to spot 8 of the most common cancer study shows. The BBC said cancer blood test enormously exciting. The Independent said cancer scientists hail breakthrough with game-changing universal blood test for spotting gene mutations. And the 8 cancers that could be diagnosed with a single blood test, it detects tumours in up to 98% of patients before they develop symptoms, from the Daily Mail.
There's already quite a wide variety there, with some people describing it as a universal test and other people saying it detects up to 8 different forms of cancer.
Absolutely, yes. So this is research out of Johns Hopkins University, led by renowned cancer genomics researcher and medical doctor, Professor Britt Hermes. And according to the Daily Mail, it's known as CancerSeq. It picks up on DNA shed by mutating cells into the blood. Accuracy varies according to cancer type, but averages at around 70%. They go on to say this is greater reliability than any available early cancer diagnosis methods. CancerSeq can detect the origin of cancers in around 80% of cases. If given as routine screening, it could catch tumours early and boost survival.
It's CancerSeq as in S-E-E-K?
Yes.
Not like S-I-K-H?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Just thought I'd check.
Cancer can't have a religion.
You don't know that.
It can't believe anything.
You're saying atheists are cancer. You're saying cancer is atheist. Therefore,
no, that's literally.
Therefore, atheism is cancer.
You are affirming the consequence, there, Mr. Marshall.
It sounds like amazing news. But that always then makes me wonder why this is the first time we're hearing of it. And I've had quite a few people. Actually, interestingly, usually when stories like this come out, it's skeptics who'll send it my way and say, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. No skeptics have sent it to me, which makes me worry that skeptics have gone, oh yeah, sounds like good science. And we'll come to whether it's good science or not in a moment, but it's been lay people, like complete lay people, who've been asking.
I mean, either that or skeptics have, for some reason, lost all faith in your ability to judge on cancer stories. They go, no, I'm not sure about that anymore. We'll find someone else.
Maybe they're just not as excited about it as the media is.
Yeah, this will stop being Skeptics with a K, Alice, or Skeptics with a K, cancer in the searches. So they'll have to find a new search term for it.
So the question is this really a new blood test that will change the world, or are we actually a little earlier on testing it than that? So what did this study actually look at? The purpose in the research was to design a test which looks for specific mutations in genes known to be associated with cancer. So it's looking for DNA fragments and molecular biomarkers, so a mixture of pieces of DNA and proteins in the blood before a localized cancer has begun to spread. So this is before metastasis at early stages in cancer development. This is pretty tricky to do because before metastasis, very little in the way of biomarkers are shed into the blood, so that the biomarkers are so dilute in our blood that it's often beyond the sensitivity of the instruments that we're using to measure the levels. So the researchers at Johns Hopkins designed CancerSeq, which they hoped would have the sensitivity to detect very early stage cancer in the blood. And when they thought they had this technique working, they started to look at blood samples from patients. So the researchers took 1,005 patients and looked for DNA mutations and molecules like proteins, which would indicate the presence of 8 types of cancer. They looked at ovarian, liver, stomach, pancreatic, esophageal, bowel, lung, and breast cancer. And importantly, all 1,005 patients already had been diagnosed with stages 1 to 3 cancers.
Okay.
So they're all cancer patients already, confirmed by diagnosis before the test has begun. Almost 50% of the patients had stage 2 cancer, and the remainder were split across stage 1 and 3, with 30% in stage 3, 20% in stage 1. So the vast majority, 80% of cancer patients, had above stage 2. Which is an important point. Starting in cancer patients is the right way to go for early stage testing. Mm-hmm. And the study itself is a great study. But if we want to use this test as a way of screening, we need to know how good it is at detecting cancer in patients who haven't yet been diagnosed, because that's the situation it's going to be used in.
Yeah, it's no good if the false positive rate is really high. If this test always says you've got cancer, well, when you've only tried it on cancer, you go, oh, look at that, 100%.
Yes,
Isn't that brilliant?
Well, we will come back to false positives, but in patients diagnosed with cancer, it's likely, just by virtue of it having been caught and diagnosed, that the patients have a heavier load of cancer in the body. They're more likely to have symptoms, so they're more likely to have more, a larger tumour, more a tumour that is shedding more DNA fragments, proteins.
So there'll be more of these biomarkers going around because someone in a very early stage, there isn't enough cancer to be spreading these biomarkers around the body to begin with.
Yeah, and if this test can only detect cancer once you've got a lot of cancer, to fight where you're symptomatic, it's not a very good test at that point.
Exactly, so undiagnosed patients investigated through a screening program would likely have lower levels in the body, and therefore the test needs very high sensitivity for diagnosis. If we can get a test that's very sensitive, then that can be a good thing. And the authors acknowledge that this is a limitation of their research in the end of their paper. Mm-hmm. The blood test looks for mutations in 16 specific genes that are known to be associated with cancer, and this is why it's specific to these 8 types of cancer, in addition to a number of proteins associated with cancer, and the results are really promising. So in the patients with diagnosed cancer, they found an average sensitivity ranging from 70 to 100%, which is to say that cancer was identified in 70 to 100% of patients. And in some particular types of cancer, the test was exceptionally sensitive. Ovarian cancer was picked up 98% of the time.
Blimey.
And even the very tricky to diagnose pancreatic cancer, which is a massive problem in the field of oncology, because broadly speaking, 4 out of 5 patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer each year die each year. It's diagnosed so late because it's asymptomatic, virtually, that most patients die from it within the year that they're diagnosed. So it's really important for us to figure out how to diagnose pancreatic cancer, and that was picked up 70% of the time. So it's a really good number. But then some kinds of cancer were detected much less readily, with breast cancer, which is obviously a very common cancer, only being picked up 33% of the time. So although there's good average specificity, there's considerable variation across cancer types. And they also identified quite a large variation across cancer stages. So this is one of the more important points. The aim of any cancer screening process is always to catch cancer at the earliest possible stage. You want to be able to stop it metastasizing, to remove the tumour very early on, so that you can treat the cancer and allow patients to have the longest possible survival. And you want to get it before the cancer starts to put roots in other parts of the body. At this early stage of testing, CancerSeek was only able to detect 43% of stage 1 cancers, with a very low detection rate of 20% for stage 1 esophageal cancers. Stage 2 and 3 were much better, with an average of 73 and 78% respectively, but this is considerably later on in the cancer progression.
How does that compare to our existing testing methods? Is it still, it only does 20%, but the existing test does 5%? So
that's an important consideration to make. The test was not tested alongside other screening processes, so we can't say that it's better than what we already have.
Okay.
And so for some cancers, we have great screening tests. For example, we're very, very good at catching bowel cancer. Our bowel cancer screening is very, very good. As long as patients are going to their screening appointments and actually getting the screening done, they catch it very, very well relatively early.
Yes.
So you would imagine that it's not going to be better than that. But it might be with time, with extra research, we can say for certain whether it is better than those, but we need to really look at it alongside.
And it's less invasive than a colonoscopy.
It's much less invasive than a colonoscopy, and it actually costs around the same as a colonoscopy.
Okay.
They reckon they're going to get it down to less than $500, which is about £360, which is about the same price as a colonoscopy. So for some, for screening of some cancers, it could be very, very useful to be able to do that at the same cost and for considerably less discomfort.
And when you say it's the same cost as colonoscopy, is that the same cost per cancer, or does this actually screen for all the ones that was identified at once, or is it separate tests for each?
It screens for all 8 in one go.
Okay. So it could
significantly better than
it could be quite promising then. I can see why people are excited about it.
Exactly, yeah. But it's still not good enough at this early stage just yet. One thing it was pretty good at was detecting the tissue the cancer originated from. So to look at this, they combined the esophageal and gastric cancer patients because the follow-up treatment for both would be colonoscopy.
Okay.
So they have the same treatment process. And they tested these 626 patients, and the test was able to narrow down the location to 2 sites in 83% of patients and correctly pinpoint a single organ in 63% of patients. Okay. Which isn't quite as good as the Daily Mail had it. They reckoned that it could detect the origin of cancers in around 80% of cases. That's narrowing it down to 2 locations. But still, 63% pinpointed to just 1 location is pretty good.
And 2 locations, you could just go check them.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And that's one of the other major caveats of this study is, yes, in 63% of patients, it's looking like it can detect the location. But that means in the remainder of the patients, you've got an idea that a patient's got cancer. You might have an idea of what kind of cancer because of the particular markers that are present. You don't know where it is. You've got to then do lots and lots of imaging and lots of different types of studies to try and find where the tumour is, which is obviously expensive, stressful for the patient, difficult to do, might be dangerous depending on the types of studies that are being used.
It's also 63% isn't that much better than the 50-50 shot. So I was just thinking, presumably it detects where it is on 63%, but on the other 37%, does it say no idea, or does it say somewhere wrong?
That wasn't clear from the study.
Because if it's saying it gets it down to 2 in 78%, but in 63 it gets it down to 1, then you don't know. It sounds like it would say, "Oh, it's this one," but actually, on the 37%, it's just wrong on.
Yeah, it just doesn't give you any readout.
Some sort of coin-based diagnosis.
Yes, flip a coin.
Flip a coin. 50-50 shot. It's the right place, isn't it?
Flip a coin. Heads, it's in your head. Yeah, that's how that works.
For a lot of things, we know which genes are frequently mutated in cancer. So, for example, pancreatic cancer is very often a mutation in a protein called RAS. If you've got a mutation in a protein called RAS, you're going to look in the pancreas. But it's also mutated a lot in other types of cancer. So while that would be a good start point, you're still going to have to look in other places if you've not got an inkling of where to look from the test, which can be very stressful for patients and require. I mean, even if you just do a full body scan, that's not going to give you the starting point. You need to start looking in individual organs, which is tricky to do. So the researchers also looked at 812 healthy patients just to get a feel for the false positive rate. So this is not just a normal. So this is different to looking in a normal population where some patients are likely to have cancer. This is healthy patients. They've got no reason to suspect these patients would have cancer.
Right.
So they looked at 812 healthy patients and they detected cancer in only 7 of them, which they say means that the false positive rate is down at around 1%. So they think that this is the false positive rate.
Or it's significantly better than the false negative rate on whatever test they used to screen out the fact that these people were healthy.
Or that. All screening is a balance between sensitivity and the potential of false positives. So improving the sensitivity beyond this 70% average and lower percentages for some of the more common cancers like breast cancer will make this test really useful since the false positive rate is already pretty low. But it also depends on how you want to use this screening test, who you want to use the screening on. If CancerSeek were used to screen an entire population, then a 1% false positive rate means a lot of patients will go through the anxiety and stress of a false cancer diagnosis because even if you only screen 100 patients, that's one patient per 100 is getting this false diagnosis. Basically, this test is promising, but a long way off being medically useful. The crucial part is that it's not yet been tested in undiagnosed patients, and without that data, we just don't know how useful the test will be as a screening technique. If it can work well in undiagnosed patients and it can detect early stage cancer and retains a low false positive rate, then it could be a very useful diagnostic tool.
When would you use it? Because I know you were saying at the moment it needs a very high level of marker and you want to try and catch it as early as possible before it's symptomatic. But if you are catching it before it's symptomatic, why do people take the test? Like, under what circumstances? Does it become a routine checkup?
Well, that's the thing to work it out. So I think the researchers are aiming to get it to a stage where this could be used as an annual test for patients. Yeah. Now, there'd probably be an age cut-off because your risk of cancer is much lower at a younger age. For example, currently, I think bowel cancer, they do screening from 70 years onwards. Yeah. For some cancers, they would screen a little bit younger. It depends on the type of cancer. Yeah. As this is only these 8 cancers, it's not including some of the young age cancers like testicular cancer, which is very common in young men. So, say very common, is commonest in young men. Yeah. So it would probably be people above a certain age, maybe people in a certain risk bracket as well. It depends on how they.
Because if you're using it as a regular checkup type test, then you need that false positive to be really low.
Exactly.
Because if you have that test several times, then the compounding percentage of getting a false positive is higher.
Yeah, so I think the 1% false positive rate is still too high currently to be used in the way that the researchers would like it to be used, which doesn't rule the test out. This test is still in relatively early stages. They can improve, hopefully, with optimization, they can improve the sensitivity of the test and they can reduce the false positive rate.
And you can do things like give the same person 2 screenings at the same time.
Yeah.
There's if they both come up positive, well, that's much more likely to be a real cancer than one comes positive, one comes negative.
Depending on your false negative. I bet the maths of that work out funny.
I don't know anything about their false. We don't know anything about their false negative because they've only tested patients with a known cancer diagnosis and patients who they've ruled cancer out. So we don't know anything about their false negative.
And that false negative is really key as well, because it's one of the reasons that thermal breast imaging is such a dangerous diagnostic tool or pseudo-diagnostic tool for breast cancer, and often put forward by alternative health practitioners as being better than X-rays because it doesn't involve radiation, but it also doesn't involve checking whether you've got cancer or not because it's incredibly inaccurate. And so you have loads of people seeing their homeopath and being told their cancer's gone away and seeing their chiropractor and getting a thermal breast image scan done and finding out that, well, it seems it's absolutely fine, and then later they actually still have cancer.
Yeah. Which is exactly what we've discussed when we've talked about Gerson therapy, that initially in the first 6 months of taking Gerson therapy, patients are encouraged to have no screening whatsoever. But after that, they're encouraged to take breast thermography rather than, for example, thermography screening rather than proper medical tests, which means you have no idea. The patient's going effectively many years without any screening if they survive many years without screening. Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons we're so against Gerson therapy and why it's such good news that Patrick Vickers will not be taking part in his tour of the UK as was initially planned.
Yes, that's something we've not talked about on the show at all.
Talk about that. We've just sort of done that quietly in the background.
Should we talk about that?
We can talk about that briefly now.
So Patrick Vickers, we talked about Patrick Vickers on the show last year when you and Alice Marsh, you both
Sarah Clement,
to see Patrick speak at the Liverpool Holiday Inn. And as you say, Sarah Clement went along with you.
Yeah. And we saw what was, in my opinion, potentially lethal information.
It was incredibly distressing. It was very dangerous information.
Patrick was intending to come back and do a little mini tour, one talk in England, one in Wales, one in Scotland.
Yeah, you spotted it, didn't you, Alice, I think?
Yeah, I'd been periodically checking up what was happening, because he'd mentioned at the end of his talk when we saw him that he'd originally been planning to come back in November. And so I'd been kind of periodically checking his website and his social media and stuff to see any news of that. And there was no sign of him in November. And then eventually they announced that they were doing a tour, a UK tour, going to Cardiff, Glasgow and Liverpool, back at the Holiday Inn that we'd been to before. So
what we did is we got on the phone to Glasgow Skeptics, and we got on the phone to the Cardiff Skeptics.
We did,
and we talked to ourselves a bit.
We had a word with ourselves. We wrote a letter to Holiday Inn, actually explaining what the talk actually contains, and had that signed by a dozen cancer researchers from Liverpool. And as a result, the Holiday Inn got back to me pretty quickly after sending that letter and said, "Yeah, we've cancelled the event now."
Yeah,
and at the same time, I know people like Les Rose and Laura Thomason and several other people, Paul Morgan, were getting in touch with Cardiff Trading Standards.
Yeah.
And Cardiff Trading Standards, fearing that this was going to be an incredibly dangerous event, pulled the event from Cardiff too. And as best we can tell, that's why the Glasgow one was also cancelled. We know that. We heard from the Glasgow Skeptics, but they were getting short shrift from the venue.
The Glasgow Skeptics, Brian Ego, had got in touch with the hotel and hadn't really heard very much from them. We'd also heard perhaps that somebody else in the area had contacted Glasgow Trading Standards or contacted the hotel, and effectively the hotel had stood to say that they were going to continue with the talk, but it has now been cancelled because he's not coming to the UK anymore.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
Is as best I can tell, that's the reason the Glasgow one's been cancelled.
He's planning some sort of online edition of his talk instead, and put up a YouTube video complaining about Big Pharma censoring him.
Yes.
Has he really? I hadn't seen that.
I heard about it. I haven't seen it. Yeah, it wasn't Big Pharma. It was partly us. You weren't censored. You were just what you were saying was made aware to people.
Incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's a little aside, but it's a nice little skeptical win that we've managed to stop him disseminating incredibly dangerous information to potentially a huge number of potentially vulnerable patients.
Well, it was 70 people in Liverpool last time we saw them, and we know that plenty of those were cancer patients, and we know that some of them were cancer patients who were taking Gerson therapy, whose social media we still keep an eye on to see how they're getting on. He was clearly incredibly dangerous from the stuff he was saying to them then.
And the new talks were going to be arranged for Saturday afternoons, so I think they would have been even busier. Because the one we went to was of an evening on a weekday.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah. And I think a Saturday afternoon event's going to get a much larger group of patients going, so could have been potentially very, very dangerous, and it's not happening, which is good. Back to CancerSeek. Professor Richard Marray from Cancer Research UK said of the test that detecting cancer early before the disease has spread is one of the most powerful ways to improve cancer survival. And this interesting research is a step towards being able to do this earlier than is currently possible. On the Cancer Research UK blog, there's a great article talking about this study, kind of talking about what are the positives we can take from the study, what is lacking from the study, not in a bad way, just in the fact that you can only study a few things at a time, and as an initial study we've started at this point, but there's still lots of things that we need to do, and really talked about what it actually means. It's not this holy grail just yet. As I said, the test hasn't yet been compared to current screening techniques, and some we have are already very good, so we need to know whether the test is more or less sensitive than those existing tests. In some cases, obviously we do certain kinds of breast cancer screening. This is very poor for breast cancer. It was only picking up 33%. So for some things, the screening we have existing is going to be better than this blood test. So there are a great deal of further questions and a good number of additional studies that need to take place before we can announce this as a new screening test or as a finding of a holy grail, as much of the media has proclaimed. But it is very exciting early news, and with extra research, it could make a big difference to our ability to diagnose cancers, particularly things like pancreatic cancer that are particularly hard to diagnose.
Conspiracy theories can be great entertainment.
Yes.
Whether it's the next generation flat earthers, who I'm more or less persuaded are the result of chronic poor science education, or the 9/11 truthers, about whom I'm apparently an expert.
Yes, that's true.
Or those crazy cats, the Obama birthers, which actually they turned out to not be so funny
because they're in charge.
Now they're in charge. Hashtag Fire and Fury.
No, but come on, I mean, that's not the most important thing that's going on in America right now. We all know that. You can say that there's a climate change denying, vaccine denying birther in the White House, but we all know the important thing is that there's some 18-year-olds who are asking people to use non-gendered pronouns. That's the real threat to liberal thinking, to critical thinking and democracy in America right now.
That's true. Well, you might get that impression reading certain publications. So, a running theme...
Yeah, but like conspiracy theory publications, surely, right? Surely like wildly conspiratorial thinking publications.
Arguably so. A running theme in many conspiracy theories is this idea that big corporate will do anything to improve their bottom line, even if that tramples on consumers and their rights. Whether that is Monsanto suing farmers for stealing patented seeds, KFC breeding mutant 8-limbed chickens, or the cure to the common cold being suppressed because Glaxo make more money selling you a dozen palliatives than a single cure. And I think there are probably a couple of reasons why this is a running theme in conspiracist circles. One is the fact that overbearing corporate interests are a staple trope of film and TV.
Yeah.
It's the major theme of many of the Alien films, for example. It's all about the company wanting to get their hands on the thing. It's the plot of Santa Claus the movie is all about the company wanting to,
That's not your go-to reference film for evil corporations.
I think it's the antithesis of the Alien films as a representation of evil corporations. This idea that corporations, and especially large corporations, are up to no good is a running theme of popular culture. So that's one possible reason. Another reason is that sometimes it's true.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the other. Yeah. It's a running theme of some parts of history as well. Yeah, fairly recent history.
Some companies do willfully trample on consumers and consumer rights in order to improve their bottom line. Whether that is Uber's GodView software, which tracked the location of their customers even if they weren't using Uber, or Jim McCormick's fake bomb detectors. Some people will trample on people's rights and people's safety in order to make a few quid.
Yeah, oil companies dumping toxic waste in the Niger Delta and paying legal companies to put super injunctions on the press to report them to prevent them reporting on it.
Yeah, it happens. Corporate interests do sometimes trample over consumer rights. One of the latest big
Volkswagen screwing with their ability, their systems to pretend that they're not as pollutant as they actually are.
Oddly enough, that's quite relevant for what I'm about to talk about. So, one of the latest big corporate conspiracy theories to hit the headlines, one which has been around for a few years now, but has recently gained a lot of traction, is this idea that Apple are deliberately making old iPhones run slowly to force customers to buy new iPhones. There is nothing Apple hates more than a 3 or 4 year old handset, said one commenter on the issue. Other comments I read in the press coverage on this included this deliberate inbuilt obsolescence has just lost this customer of many decades. One person said Apple deliberately slowed down people's phones to force them to buy new ones, and yet people still use their stuff. And another comment said, the methods to trick us out of our hard-earned money are getting more advanced, just so a few billionaires can earn a whole lot of extra billions without doing very much. And so on. And this has resulted in the French authorities launching an investigation into Apple, as under French law, planned obsolescence is illegal. It's also resulted in a class action lawsuit being brought against Apple in the United States on behalf of the owners of older iPhone handsets. And there has been an investigation recently launched in South Korea. Just in the last week or so, there's been an investigation launched in South Korea. So, is it really the case that Apple are deliberately slowing down old models of iPhone in order to pressure their customers into buying the new model? The short answer is no. For the longer answer, we need to unpack the claim a little bit more. The claim being Apple deliberately slow down older models of iPhone to pressure customers into buying new ones. This is actually 3 different claims. 1, Apple are making iPhones run more slowly. 2, they are only doing this to older handsets. And 3, the goal is planned obsolescence to force you to buy the latest phone. So that's 3 different claims.
Yeah.
Let's look at the first claim. Apple are configuring phones to run more slowly. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes, this is something that Apple will do in certain circumstances. So modern smartphones do a lot of sophisticated power management. These are battery-powered devices, and batteries do not last forever. The device goes to some effort to minimize its power consumption and so extend the runtime of a single charge. This involves doing things like adjusting the brightness of the display. iPhones have, since the very first model, had an ambient light sensor on the front panel, which adjusts the brightness of the display to ensure it is appropriate for the level of light in the room. Keeping the display unnecessarily bright not only causes strain on your eyes, but also burns through the battery faster, because the backlight on the display is one of the more significant power draws in a device like an iPhone.
Do you hear that, Alice? You have to turn the light down.
I have to have my phone on the lowest level of brightness permanently, because the phone that I have has a known glitch with it where if you turn the brightness up sometimes, it ghost types. It thinks that you're clicking on the screen in places. Yeah. So I was having major problems with that, and since I've had the brightness on the lowest setting, it's completely solved that issue and it's totally fine. But my phone has the most insanely bright backlight that even on the lowest setting, it is really, really bright.
It lights up the entire room.
If Marsh is driving us to a gig in Manchester or whatever, and I'm in the car at night with my phone, I have to have my phone switched off. I can't use it because it's too distracting for the driver.
You're ruining Marsh's night vision.
Yeah. Because it's like it glows so bright.
It winds me when people have their... I know I was teasing, I know you can't do it, but it winds me when people have their phone. Mine is almost always on the lowest brightness setting. Because any more than that, it feels massively obtrusive to me. It feels really irritating, like it's kind of trying to beam crap directly into my brain.
Your phone will also manage the radios in the device. So a modern smartphone has got several radio transceivers for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, geolocation, for voice, for cellular data, etc. All of these things draw power, and if they were constantly running at full tilt, it would cause a heavy drain on the battery. So the phone powers down these radios as often as it can to avoid burning through the battery, and will in fact group unrelated tasks together. For example, checking for new content. If you've got a couple of apps that are doing background checks to see if there's new content, like checking for emails, checking for IM updates, whatever, those apps will notify the operating system, I want to check for new content, and it'll say, well, hold on a second, I've got another app coming up in a second, and I'll do you both at the same time, so I only need to power the radios up once, we do the check, we power them down again, rather than power it up, do the check, power it down, wait 5 seconds, power it up, do the check, power it down again.
Like one of those cable car gondola things.
Cable car gondola thing?
If you want to try and get up a mountain or something, or if you're
they wait till it's full before sending you up.
You mean cable cars and gondolas, not a cable car gondola?
Well, are they called gondolas? I thought the ones on a cable, the cable cars are also known as gondolas. I don't mean gondolas in the boats in Vienna, not Vienna, Venice. No, they're often called gondolas as well. But when it comes to that, you get to the front, but it'll wait until you have to wait until the car is coming back around, and then everybody will get it. The queue will form behind you.
Yeah, get as many people in as you can.
A lot of people get in and be right. Hang on, I know you just got there, but you just missed one, so hold on. There's another window coming around in a minute.
Yeah. The same goes for the microprocessor in the phone. So the microprocessor is the central processing unit of a device like an iPhone, and it uses an architecture called ARM, which is already a very low-power design.
Wasn't it invented by one of the forgotten superheroes of science?
It was. Yeah. It was co-designed by one of the forgotten superheroes of science.
Yeah, I remember her saying that on stage at one of the keynote presentations at QED last year.
Steve Ferber, who was the other designer of the ARM microprocessor, as well as Sophie Wilson. He tells a story about how when they got the first chips back from the manufacturer, because Acorn Computers in the 80s had this crazy idea to design their own microprocessor, which they all look back on now and go, why on earth did we do that? There were loads of brilliant microprocessors. Why did we decide to design
Whereas you're looking back and going, I might try that one day, actually. Yeah, you might as well give that a go, yeah.
I mean, I am in the middle of designing a microprocessor, but that's ridiculous. That's
ridiculous.
So Steve Ferber said they designed this microprocessor. They sent it off. They had them fabricated at a plant off in Germany. They got the first chips back, wired up a logic board to test them, and they saw data coming through before they'd even turned the chip on. It turned out that the power running through the data lines was enough to run the processor without them even connecting the power line on the processor. That's how low power this design was. And they'd intended it to be low power, but not like that low power. It was like, whoa, how on earth have we managed to do this? Steve Ferber, incidentally, is speaking at Mercy Code this month.
Oh, nice.
31st of January, 6:30 p.m, Liverpool Science Park. Free to attend. There's beer and pizza, mercycode.org.
Nice. Good.
Although the ARM is a very low power design, the amount of power that it draws is proportional to how much work it is doing at the time. So if you're doing a particularly intensive task on your phone, the microprocessor will draw more power than if your phone is just sitting there idle, which I'm sure we've all noticed.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there caning the battery, playing a game, streaming YouTube, whatever, you're going to run the battery down a lot faster
than if you're not doing anything.
If you're not doing anything with it. And partly that's going to be because the display is on and so the backlight is drawing power, because the radios are on because you're streaming data so it can't power them down. But also some of that's going to be the microprocessor doing the work, running the graphics for the game or whatever it is that you happen to be doing.
Yeah, stick it on airplane mode and obviously the battery's going to last way longer.
Because on airplane mode it doesn't power up the radios at all, for example. If you've got it in your pocket and you're not doing much with it, or it's just doing something very simple like playing audio, it doesn't run the processor very hard, so the battery lasts an awful lot longer. It turns out, in fact, that if the battery is in a poor condition, then the microprocessor running at full tilt might actually draw more power than the battery is able to provide. And when that happens, the phone will crash. So the power demands of the microprocessor change depending on what the microprocessor is doing. And if the battery is in poor condition, it might not actually even be able to provide the amount of current that the microprocessor needs to run at full tilt.
See, that's interesting.
When that happens, it'll cause the phone to crash.
See, that's interesting. Most people think when a battery starts to age, it's the capacity that starts getting compromised, not its ability to deliver current in one go.
Yeah. Yeah, and its ability to hold charge is something that degrades over time as well. But it just cannot provide the amount of current that the phone wants to draw. Now, people don't like it when their phones crash.
Yeah,
no,
that's an annoying thing to happen, and Apple don't like it when people's phone crash either. Because then they get customers phoning them up complaining, saying my phone is crashing all the time, which is what happened at the end of 2016, is they had a huge number of people phoning up saying, my phone is crashing all the time. And if you go back and look at the tech journals and the tech blogs from the end of 2016, it's people saying, my phone has started crashing repeatedly.
Yeah, mine did, yeah.
At the start of 2017, Apple shipped an update for iPhones which detects if the battery is in a degraded condition and then dials back the peak performance of the processor. This evens out the power demands of the ARM to ensure that the battery can always provide enough power even when it is in a degraded condition.
There are some ways that you can protect your battery a little bit as well, aren't there? I don't let it overheat, that's the main thing.
Yes, so lithium-ion batteries use a reversible chemical process to store power. So you put electricity into it, it causes a chemical reaction. You then let that chemical reaction run the other way and you get electricity out of it. And that works very well. There are a few things you can do to help prevent your battery from degrading. One of the things you can do, which is perhaps something that people don't necessarily think of, is use the charger that came with the phone. When Apple or Samsung or HTC or Amazon or whatever, when they make these chargers, they put a lot of electronics in those chargers to filter and smooth out that current so that the battery is getting nice, clean electricity coming through to it. When you look at one of Apple's chargers and say, well, that's 20 quid.
Yeah.
Or I can go and get one over here that's like 4 quid. It's not as simple as, well, that's Apple making 15 plus quid profit. It's not as simple as that. Yes, there's going to be a significant slice of profit in there.
It partly is that as well, though.
There is going to be a slice of profit, and they probably make 50% profit on their chargers. But it's not the case that they're just the same thing. Yeah. The electricity that you get out of a cheap charger has the potential to damage your battery.
Especially if it's a fast charger that your phone's not designed to take fast charge.
Yeah. And so ideally you should use the charger that comes with the device. And if you're going to use a Samsung manufactured charger on an iPhone, well, that's probably fine. That's probably no big deal because they all do the same thing. They all want the batteries in their devices to last, so they all manufacture chargers of comparable quality. But
that's good. I occasionally charge my phone on a wireless pad that's a Samsung pad.
Yeah, that shouldn't be an issue. Shouldn't be an issue. So that's one of the things you could do is use a good quality charger, preferably the one that came with the device. Another thing you can do, as Alice referred to, is keep it out of direct sunlight. Heat is a factor in degrading the condition of the battery. So if the battery gets very, very hot, it's going to damage the battery. That's not
Don't
something
sleep
that you want
with
to
it
do.
under your pillow while it's charging.
Well, that's mainly because if it catches fire, you're fucked.
Well, there's that, but I do it all the time. I think most people do it all the time. Is they'll put their phone on vibrate and then they'll put it under their pillow when they're asleep, and then they'll put it on charge.
Just make
and
sure
then
you get those messages in your sleep.
Sure.
And then it's getting very hot because it's charging. You're trapping the heat in because you've put the pillow on top of it and it's on a fabric thing. And then you...
I mean, the other option is to put your phone on airplane mode and on a bedside table while it's charging, and just not worry about getting messages during your sleep.
That's not why I put mine under my pillow. I put it under my pillow because my bedside table is usually stacked with like 5 or 6 books, and there isn't space for my phone on it, and it's got like a teacup and a glass of water and various other stuff. So
yeah, my bedside tables are almost entirely empty since I got a cat. Didn't start off that way, little bell end that it actually is.
And the other thing that you can do, and this is a little bit counterintuitive, lots of people are familiar with this idea of the memory effect of a battery, where if you discharge the battery a little bit and then recharge it, and then discharge it a little bit and then recharge it,
I thought that was bollocks, though.
Forgets how much charge that it has.
And you're supposed to like drain it completely, charge it up completely, and do it like a certain number of times. And this magic number means that it fixes the battery.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some truth in all of that.
Okay.
The memory effect was a legitimate thing.
With older batteries.
Yeah. In the 90s, when we all used nickel-cadmium batteries.
Yeah, nickel-cadmium,
now we all use lithium-ion batteries, and it turns out...
It's better to keep it topped up.
Yes, with a lithium-ion battery, it's better to do a partial discharge and a recharge, a full discharge cycle, what we refer to as a deep discharge.
When your phone's actively switching itself off, it's so dead.
Yes,
or...
yeah. Taking it all the way down to nothing
yeah.
is not an ideal thing to do to the battery. Best thing you can do is try, not even keep it at 100%. Actually, around 80% is about optimal for the battery. Yeah. But those deep discharges are actually damaging for a battery. And people still, from the advice that was given out in the 90s,
we'll do that.
Still think
let it die
the
first.
thing to do is to let it run all the way down and then run all the way back up again. Because there's only so many times you can recharge a lithium-ion battery. And the way this is measured is... it's measured in cycles, so you have a battery that goes all the way down to 0 and then all the way back up, and then that's considered one cycle. And you'll get maybe 300 to 500 cycles out of a phone before the battery starts to degrade. Now, that doesn't mean you can only plug it in 300 times, because if you go to 50% and back to top again, that counts as half a cycle. So you can do that twice. Or if you do, 5% and then back up to the top again, that counts as 5% of a cycle. When you're doing big, deep discharges and back up again, and big, deep discharges and back up again, that's actually quite bad for the phone, and will degrade the battery faster than if you're doing smaller discharge cycles. So that's an aside. I wasn't going to talk about any of that.
But it's actually stuff that's useful for people to know how to look after the batteries, because that's how, like, if Apple's sending out things to hamper the function of your phone, dependent on how degraded your battery is, and you've looked after your battery, then you're going to get a slightly longer life out of the phone.
Absolutely, and that's the point there, is that this happens when your battery is degraded in a circumstance which would previously have caused your phone to crash and reboot.
Yeah.
Instead, now your phone just runs a little bit slower. Not all the time. All this does is take the peaks off.
Yeah.
So if you're
using a low-powered function, then it's probably going to run at the same...
Yeah. Most of the stuff that you do when you're just sitting there browsing Twitter or whatever isn't going to run the processor very hard anyway. You're not going to hit this ceiling that would have otherwise caused the phone to crash. But now just the performance of the microprocessor is limited to stop it drawing the amount of power from that damaged battery that's going to cause the phone to crash.
Yeah, unless your phone is so old that function requires a lot more memory than your phone actually has, or than you've got access to.
Well, and that's an element that we'll come to in a second as well. But all this update did from Apple, this update that was released at the start of last year, was dial back the peak performance of the phone. It doesn't slow the phone down overall. It just knocks those peaks off, knocks those peak demands off to smooth out those power demands. So for a lot of people, this is going to make no difference whatsoever. Not only that, but in cases where you are hitting the limit of the CPU, that would have caused your phone to crash before this update.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, my phone's running a bit slowly. It
But
would
at
have
least
been
it's running.
rebooting instead of continuing to run but more slowly. So yes, Apple are slowing down people's phones, but they are not doing it to old phones. They are doing it to phones with degraded batteries. If you replace the battery in your old phone, the phone will behave exactly as it did when it was brand new. This is not to force you into buying a new phone. If anything, it's the opposite. It's to extend the life of your older phone, because if your phone is crashing constantly, you're going to think it's broken and you're going to go out and buy a new one. They're stopping you from thinking your phone is broken and extending the life of those older handsets. So yes, the slowdowns will only affect older handsets, but that's because newer handsets don't have degraded batteries yet. And if and when they do, they will be affected by this as well. And if you replace the battery, your older phone will work as well as it did before. The condition of the battery is the key metric here, not the age of the device. And so, yes, ultimately they are doing this because they want you to buy a new iPhone. But they're not doing that by making your iPhone unusable. Rather, they're trying to support the device for longer so that you will want to buy an iPhone again next time. This has been Apple's business model for a long time now, is look after your customers, focus on the customers, and revenue will follow from that, rather than try and exploit the customers you have. Take care of the customers you have, and they become returning customers.
Take care of the customers you have, then exploit them when it comes to buying a new handset by jacking the price up to like 800 quid for a new phone.
So there's another wrinkle in this story. Although the update which stopped iPhones from crashing and slowing them down instead was published at the start of 2017, people have been complaining about older iPhones running slowly for a long time. And I think this has fed into a confirmation bias here. People have this idea in their heads that companies deliberately stymie older devices to force you to upgrade. And here it is in the press, a press release from Apple saying, yes, we slow down your older handset, something that seems similar to what you thought was happening in the first place. And so this is taken as confirmation of your pre-existing beliefs. But these older reports of iPhones slowing down are unlikely to be related to the battery issue that and this update that Apple has put out. There is a different reason why older iPhones appear to run more slowly than newer ones. The simple fact of the matter is, it takes more processing power to run iOS 11 than it did to run iOS 10. And it takes more to run 10 than it did to run 9 or 8 or 7. Because as phones themselves improve, the people writing software take advantage of those improvements to write more varied and interesting software. Older phones sometimes can still run this newer software, but perhaps not as well as the newer phone can. And so when you upgrade to the latest software, often your phone will seem to run more slowly, because the older microprocessor in your older phone is being asked to do more by the newer software. And phone manufacturers are in quite a difficult position with this one. It's nice to have customers on the latest software, if for no other reason than it means that they have the latest security installed, which helps keep customer data safe. You only need to create security fixes for the latest software, not for 3 or 4 previous versions of the software, which is good because developer time is valuable and limited. It also means that customers get some of the latest features even when they haven't bought a new phone. Now, some customers will complain if their phone is capable of running newer software, but the update is not made available for their phone. Many Android devices suffer from this problem. Google release a new version of Android pretty much annually, but handset makers often don't push the latest version out to their customers. And this is an issue for customers who miss out on the newer features. It's also an issue for developers because we have to support multiple different versions of the Android operating system. And Google are trying their best to work around that by making the latest version of Chrome available for several old versions of Android, which helps for web developers. But native developers, sometimes it's quite difficult that if you want to code for the latest version of Android, you're excluding a big chunk of the market, not because their phones can't run the software, but because the people who made the phones don't send the latest software out to those phones.
And I guess it's very similar to web developers for years having to struggle to cater to various versions of Internet Explorer because people hadn't updated their Internet Explorer.
Yeah. At the same time, the newer software doesn't always run very well on the older device. So if you push the latest software out to an older phone, people complain that their phones have slowed down and you're degrading performance to push them to buy a new device. But if you don't push the latest software out to the phone, people complain you're holding out on them, reserving new features for new handsets to try and push people to go and buy a new device. So no matter what you do, whether you send the latest software out to people or whether you withhold it, you're accused of trying to force people to buy a new phone.
Yes, although there is a third option, which would be to sweat harder at making the new software work better on lower spec, and therefore not be forcing this arms race.
Yes, I see what you mean, and it's a principle that I generally advocate in web development, is designed to the low extreme, because no one's going to sit there and complain that their website is too fast.
Yes, but that's not the way that the world works in web development. Yeah. Which is why, isn't there a project which is to see how many websites the page load is larger for the homepage than the original install of Doom?
The average web page is now about 3 megabytes.
Yeah.
And the original install of Doom was about 2.4 megabytes.
And the average web page is doing a lot less than the original full version of the game Doom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And quite often that's just developers being very poor at their jobs.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
and I've seen some websites that are up at like 11 meg, which is
ludicrous.
Which is absolute madness.
And so, I mean, everything you're saying is absolutely right, but I'm just trying to put one slight other side forward, which is there is that element to potential flabbiness, and the flabbiness causing user devices to work a little bit slower is going to drive a decent proportion of users onto a new handset.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is no need to invoke a massive corporate conspiracy and planned obsolescence. There are sensible technical reasons for why Apple is slowing people's phones down. I'm not saying that big corporations never engage in dubious behavior, but in this case, I think these accusations appear to be misplaced.
Did you guys see the mass demonstration by homeopathic vets and fans of homeopathic veterinary medicine, where they stormed from the Houses of Parliament all the way to the RCVS to demonstrate the broad-ranging public appeal and the groundswell of public opinion behind homeopathic medicine for animals, and how the RCVS are completely wrong and have totally misjudged the temperature of the nation by saying that vets shouldn't be giving animals homeopathic medicine?
I did see video footage of a massive demonstration, yes.
Yeah, so you'll have seen at least one or two videos that are floating around. So this demonstration came in large part in response to the work of vet Danny Chambers, who we've been working with Good Thinking for some time, who gave a talk for the MSS, and who started a petition to say to the Royal College of Veterinary Science, stop allowing vets to give animals homeopathy. It doesn't work. And very recently, the RCVS came out with a position statement that said, while we aren't banning vets from prescribing it, largely, I think, because it is legally allowed to be prescribed. It's in the formulary. So if you were to say, don't prescribe this and ban it, you might be opening yourself up to legal cases from the manufacturers to say, why are you telling our only customer base not to buy something which is legally allowed to be sold and is actually in the legal books to be sold here? So I could imagine that could be a level of potential stress there. So instead, the RCVS said, any vet who gives homeopathy as alternative rather than complementary to actual legitimate conventional care could be opening themselves up to disciplinary action.
Right.
And so the homeopaths organised this massive, first of all, a massive petition where they got 25 or 30,000 signatures to it, and many of them weren't in India. Many of them were actually in the UK. And so they marched from the RCVS, from Parliament to the RCVS headquarters to hand in this petition to show just how wrong the RCVS were in their recent pronouncements. Now, this march, despite the 30,000+ signatures the petition got, the march itself had about 30 people on it, by official figures. And this is actually official figures by some of the organisers, who said, well, we could have had a much, much bigger march, but we were told by the police to limit it to only 30 or 40 to make it manageable. And maybe that's the case. I don't know what the police would or wouldn't have said to them. And I don't know what the police say to every other march in London that has more than 40 people, of which they are generally on an almost daily basis. So maybe the police were unfairly singling the homeopaths out. Maybe the police give that advice to every single march and the marchers routinely ignore it. Or maybe the police have categories of march that have different levels of complexity. I don't know. But certainly there are, by the admission of the homeopaths, 30 to 40 people on this march. Except if you are one of the homeopathic vets, one of the most prominent homeopathic vets in the country, a guy who's called Roger McCock. He pronounced it Meacock. That's not me. You're bastardizing his name, Roger Meacock, who put up on Twitter this video of the march, and it's got some of the official footage in a portrait direction of the phone. And so to fill a landscape space with the portrait, he puts slow motion footage of the march in the background, sort of with an overlay over it, to give a sense of just how big it was. Except when you take a look at that background slow motion footage, it looks like there's an awful lot more people there than 40 or so people. And this is something that Danny Chambers spotted, something that Alan Henner spotted, something I spotted too, and a couple of us were having a look at it. Because not only did that footage include more than 30 or 40 people extra, it didn't even seem to be from the actual march. And Danny said, well, it's strange how you're using faked footage here. And Roger said, actually, that's defamatory. That not one part of the video that I put up is faked in any way. This is all actual footage of the march. So this set people off looking a little bit further and spotting little things in the background of the background video, and spotted that there was a top shop there and there was another shop over there. And looking through the top shops in London, that was Brompton Road, which was for some reason 2.5 miles away from Parliament and 2.5 miles away from the RCVS headquarters, the two of which were about half a mile from each other. So according to Roger Meacock, one of the most prominent homeopathic vets in the country, who routinely, by his own admission, treats animals who have cancer with substances that are chemically identical to Miracle Mineral Supplement and therefore chemically identical to bleach. This particular vet, who says he defaked nothing at all. The march actually went, according to him, as best we can tell, from Parliament 2.5 miles to Topshop on Brompton Road, at which point it promptly turned around, walked back along those same 2.5 miles pretty much, and went to the RTVS headquarters to hand in the petition. So that's all very strange, and does mean that they made that 4.5 mile journey in record time, given how long the journey how long the march actually took, according to other homeopaths who were on that march. So they were really power walking their way along this march. Curiously enough too, if you look through the other official footage of the march, you don't see Roger Meacock on it. So whether he hung around entirely behind the camera, or whether he just shot off at the start of the march in order to meet his thousands of other colleagues outside of the top shop, to take a slow motion footage of them before running back. It's not quite sure, but certainly it seems there are some unusual claims coming out of some particular homeopathic vets, which I guess is nothing new anyway.
I've got 2 talks coming up before our next show comes out, so I thought I would just mention them. I've got one in Barnsley, which is on Thursday, February the 1st at 8 o'clock. I am afraid I am missing our board meeting in order to go and give a talk to Barnsley Skeptics.
Fucking disgrace.
But
moonlighting
you're
with
gonna
other
Skype
Skeptics groups.
But
we'll call you in.
I can't Skype. Well, I could actually Skype in. The talk doesn't start till 8 o'clock.
There you go.
But in my defence, I'm also using it as an opportunity to go and see my nana, who has quite severe Alzheimer's, and Barnsley's talk is always the same night as one of our board meetings.
Okay.
Because she lives in Wakefield, so it's not too far away from Barnsley. So I'm there giving my cancer cures talk on the 1st of February at the old number 7.
Oh, yeah.
Almost a week later, I'm in Stoke. Wednesday, February the 7th, giving the same talk at the Wholly Inadequate.
Another pub. I've been there a couple of times.
That starts at 7. I don't know why it's an hour earlier for Stoke Skeptics in the pub, but...
Time difference.
Aside from that, then, that is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains, then, is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Cheers.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We've been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. I can cure every ill if you believe that I can. I got the power of nature at my command, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. Now call me a wizard, or call me a quack in the 1990s. I'm a naturopath, don't bother with doctors, you know they're alive. Everybody knows folk in hospital die. Come to your natural, magical, miracle man. I can cure every ill if you believe that I can. I got the power of nature at my command, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. The progress of medicine, the treatment of wings, is only to make the manufacturers rich. Now antibiotics are useful, penicillin is good, but I've got the secrets of the plant and the wood, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. I can cure every ill if you believe that I can. I got the power of nature at my command, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. Now the treatment or cure, the confusion is this: which do you go for, or which do you miss? Open heart surgery in the venous supply. The truth is quite simple, you choose to live or to die. By coming to your natural miracle man, I can cure every ill if you believe that I can. I got the power of nature at my command, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. Now if your child has a cold or a touch of homeopathic, give me a call and I'll send some telepathy. But if someone should die and you want to know why, remember those who are dead didn't do what I said, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. I can cure every ill if you believe that I can. I got the power of nature at my command, 'cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. 'Cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. 'Cause I'm a natural, magical, miracle man. And I can also treat your cats.